There's a certain look people give when they think they've caught someone. Eyes narrowed, lips tight, voices calm, but sharp like they're waiting for a scene. That's exactly what they gave her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch, just stood there while they called her a threat, a fraud, a problem to be handled. The check in her hand wasn't the issue, they were. What no one in that bank realized was that the woman they dismissed so easily had more power than they could imagine. She wasn't just another black face they could wave off. She was the story they'd regret starring in. What happened next wasn't luck. It was consequence. If you're into stories where silence turns into a storm, where the underestimated flip the script, then hit that like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. You're going to want to see this one through. The digital clock above the teller windows read 3:06 p.m. when Zella Harrington entered Crestwood National Bank. Her steps were deliberate but relaxed, her posture upright, and her eyes calm as she moved across the air-conditioned marble floor. She wore a navy blazer over a crisp blouse, her hair neatly pulled back, her leather portfolio tucked confidently beneath one arm. Zella was the image of professionalism, poised and composed, carrying a check worth $12,000. To any impartial observer, she looked like she belonged. But impartiality was a luxury not afforded to everyone. Choosing the shortest line, she stepped to the third window where a young man with a buzzed haircut and a faint smirk sat behind the glass. His name tag read Thad, and he glanced up just long enough to acknowledge her existence. Zella offered a warm, neutral smile and slid the check forward. "Good afternoon. I'd like to deposit this into my business account." Thad looked down at the check and froze. He didn't pick it up. He didn't scan it. He just stared, and not at the check, for a second too long. He studied her. "This seems questionable," he said finally. His tone flat, but his implication unmistakable. Zella blinked, unsure she'd heard him correctly. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice polite but firm. "The check. What's the story?" he said, poking at the corner of it with his pen as if it were something toxic. "It's from a private consulting firm. I'm an independent strategist. It's payment for a 6-month contract." She opened her portfolio, retrieved the invoice, the contract, and her driver's license, and offered them all with quiet composure. Thad ignored the documents. Instead, he reached under the counter and pressed a small red button. "Security to window 3, he said into a phone without meeting her eyes. Zella felt the room shift around her. A hush rolled through the lobby like a slow-moving wave. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. She looked behind her. Customers stared, trying not to look like they were staring. "What's going on?" she asked Thad. "That check doesn't look right," he said. "We've had fraud attempts recently. Can't be too careful." "You haven't even scanned it," she said, her voice beginning to tremble not with fear, but disbelief. "You didn't verify anything. I gave you identification, a contract, documentation." "Ma'am," he interrupted, and now his voice was louder, performative. "Please step aside while we sort this out." At that moment, a uniformed security guard approached. He was tall, square-shouldered, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with me," he said. Zella looked from the guard to Thad. "This is a mistake," she said. "I've banked here for 6 years. This is my account." She reached into her purse and pulled out her bank card. Thad just shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Could be someone else's card." He glanced toward the guard. "Escort her to the waiting room. Manager'll take it from here." "This is absurd," she whispered. But she gathered her things, clutching them close to her chest, and followed the guard through the lobby. She passed by rows of silent watchers, some pretending not to notice, others clearly judging. The shame burned hotter than the summer sun outside. In the waiting room, she sat on a hard chair beside a fake plant and tried to slow her breathing. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, the manager appeared, dressed in clay, tall, tanned, hair silver at the temples. His expression was all corporate politeness. "Ms. Harrington?" "Yes," she said, standing. She held out her documents again. "My check was flagged. I'd like to explain. Dresden didn't take the papers." He looked at the check Thad had now placed on a clipboard. He didn't even touch it. "This doesn't look legitimate," he said. "I assure you it is. I know it's a large sum, but I'm a licensed consultant. I have all the documentation right here." He held up a hand to silence her. Then, without another word, tore the check neatly in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the room. "We don't take chances with fraud," he said flatly. "You're welcome to contact the issuer and request a new check. And next time, perhaps go to their bank." Zella stood there, stunned. The humiliation crushed her chest. She simply changed out of her blazer, folded it as if preserving some dignity in the act, and placed it at the back of her closet. The next morning she stood in front of the mirror, her face impassive, her eyes duller than they had been the day before. But she was not going to let it end there. She printed another copy of her contract, called the client to confirm reissuance, and emailed a request to Crestwood Bank's corporate customer service team for documentation of what had occurred. She did not scream. She did not threaten. She chose, instead, to move forward methodically. That afternoon, she returned to the same branch, not because she wanted to, but because it was closest, and because some part of her needed to reclaim the narrative, even if she wasn't ready to admit that to herself. She walked in quietly, this time with her documents already in hand, clearly labeled, paper-clipped, organized. Her shoulders were square, her steps steady. But as she approached the counter, she saw the familiar smirk of Thad Pruitt just 2 stations away, leaning back in his chair like a prince among peasants. Today's teller was different. A woman named Rochelle, who seemed distracted by her screen and offered a tired smile. Zella placed the new check down, explained the issue succinctly, and handed over all supporting documents again. Rochelle nodded and began typing. For one brief moment, Zella felt hope. Then Rochelle paused, frowned slightly, and muttered something under her breath. "Excuse me?" Zella asked. Rochelle didn't answer directly. She stood, retrieved a folder, and walked into the back office. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Zella stood, alone at the counter, aware of eyes drifting her way. Again. Finally, the door opened and out walked Dresden Clay, the same manager who had dismissed her yesterday like an unruly child. His expression hadn't changed. Cold, practiced, devoid of empathy. "Ms. Harrington," he said flatly, "we meet again." Zella straightened. "Yes, I'm here with a new check and supporting paperwork. I'd like to deposit it, and I'd appreciate a little professionalism this time." Dresden didn't look at her papers. He didn't even glance at the check. He folded his arms. "You understand we have protocols, and those protocols haven't changed." "Your protocols didn't even involve checking my ID yesterday," she said, her voice sharp but restrained. "You assumed fraud without evidence and destroyed a valid financial instrument." Dresden didn't flinch. "And you returned. That takes nerve. Or something else." Zella stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means we've flagged your account," he said, "for review." Zella's hands clenched. "On what grounds?" "Suspicious behavior," he replied, still not looking at the check. "That includes presenting a check that couldn't be verified and refusing to leave when asked." "Refusing?" she echoed. "You had me escorted by security like a criminal." "Because we follow protocol," he said again. "And you are not above it." Zella tried once more. "My client is available right now. I can call them, you can speak directly. That won't be necessary," Dresden said, cutting her off. "We can't allow external verification calls. It's not secure." "So your solution is to refuse verification altogether," she said. "Is that what protocol says, or is that just you?" "I'm not going to entertain tone, Ms. Harrington," he said. Then, with a move so casual it nearly made her scream, he picked up the new check, glanced at it, and with 2 fingers, tore it clean down the middle. Zella gasped. The sound of tearing paper, again, struck like a slap. The people nearby stopped talking. All heads turned toward them now, watching. "We don't take chances," Dresden announced, "especially with repeat attempts." He placed the torn pieces beside her documents and motioned for a staffer to approach. "Please escort Ms. Harrington out." "No," Zella said, voice shaking. "You don't get to." "Now," Dresden said louder, "before we contact local authorities." That word, authorities, hit her stomach like a rock. She gathered her things slowly, fighting back the heat building behind her eyes. She looked at Dresden once more, silently pleading for some sign of humanity, but found none. He had already turned away. The staffer, an older man who looked more ashamed than annoyed, gently gestured toward the exit. Zella walked past every customer, every watching eye, her head high, but her spirit wrecked. She had planned everything perfectly, had walked in composed, organized, and professional, but none of it mattered. The truth meant nothing against the weight of prejudice wrapped in protocol. The next morning, she couldn't force herself out of bed. Her body ached from tension. Her phone buzzed endlessly from emails, but she ignored them all until early afternoon. When she finally opened her eyes to face the world again, her first instinct was to search her name. No headlines, no articles, no outrage, just her silence echoing back at her from the void. That silence was worse than the stares in the lobby. It made her feel invisible, like none of it happened, like it never would have mattered even if it had. On the third day, she found herself again in her car outside the branch, not to deposit anything, not for resolution, but to sit and watch, to bear witness. She didn't know why she returned, only that something inside her needed to know if it would still hurt to see them again. Thad stood at the teller window, laughing with another employee, waving his hands animatedly, as if reliving a joke. Dresden passed behind him, giving a small nod before disappearing into the back. The sight made Zella's stomach churn. But this time, she didn't just watch. She picked up her phone and hit record. She turned the camera toward the building, then flipped it on herself. "My name is Zella Harrington," she said, her voice steady but low. "I've banked here for 6 years. I've never missed a payment, never bounced a check. But twice now, I've had checks destroyed in front of me. Both were legal, both backed by contracts and identification, both dismissed without verification. The only thing they saw in me was a threat." Her hand trembled as she pressed pause. That night, she stared at the video for nearly an hour before deciding not to post it. Not yet, but something shifted in her. The next morning, she walked into the branch again, not to be brave, not to confront, only to record. She turned on her camera before stepping inside, held it low by her waist, and waited in line. The moment Thad saw her, his smile faded. He muttered something under his breath to Rochelle, who quickly traded places with him. Zella approached. "Just checking on the status of the complaint I submitted," she said evenly. Rochelle didn't answer. Instead, she stepped away and returned moments later with Dresden. "Ms. Harrington," he said with a smile that made her skin crawl. "You again?" "Yes, me," she replied. "I emailed corporate, filed a formal grievance. No response." "I'm sure they'll respond in due time," Dresden said. "Meanwhile, we've noted your concerns internally." "Have you?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "Because last I checked, you flagged my account for review and never gave me an explanation." Dresden's smile faltered. "We've taken appropriate action based on behavior patterns we've observed." "You mean me walking in and trying to deposit a check?" she shot back. "That pattern." Around them, people had begun to listen. The woman in line behind Zella leaned in slightly, her expression confused. A man 2 rows over narrowed his eyes at Dresden, sensing something off. Zella noticed. So did Thad. "Ma'am, you're not allowed to record on private property," Thad said suddenly, stepping forward. "I saw the red light. Turn it off." Zella didn't move. "Why?" she asked. "Because I'm documenting how I'm treated? Is that against your precious protocol too?" Thad looked over his shoulder at Dresden, who stepped closer. "You'll need to leave or we'll involve security again." Zella lowered the phone. "Fine, but let it be known, I'm not leaving quietly anymore." She turned and walked toward the door, phone still recording, catching gasps and whispers from bystanders who had overheard. That night, someone else, an unknown customer, uploaded their own footage. A side-angle clip of the exchange. Zella's voice. Thad's order to turn off the phone. Dresden's cold responses. The video hit social media within hours under the title "Woman Wrongfully Targeted at Crestwood Bank." It spread like wildfire. By the next day, it had 100,000 views, then 500,000. Local news picked it up. Bloggers dissected every second. Commenters dug up employee records, even dredging up past complaints that had been buried quietly. Crestwood Bank issued a response 2 days later. "We are aware of a video circulating online. Crestwood takes all customer concerns seriously and operates under strict compliance measures. Our priority is to protect all clients from potential fraud." That was it. But instead of truth triggering justice, the fallout took a darker turn. The night after Crestwood Bank issued its cold, dismissive statement, a new clip surfaced, edited, repackaged, and weaponized. It began not with Thad's initial confrontation or Dresden's cold dismissal, but halfway through the interaction, right at the moment where Zella's voice rose in protest. In the altered footage, her controlled frustration was isolated and exaggerated. She appeared angry, hostile, unreasonable. Thad was shown as calm, collected, even professional, nodding while she spoke. Dresden, cropped and centered, wore the same cold neutrality, but the angle made him appear rational, as though pacifying a disruptive customer. The video was posted to an anonymous account and shared by a banking industry blog with a headline that read, "Customer tirade over check dispute goes viral. Security concerns raised." Within hours, it was everywhere. Facebook posts shared it with captions like, "Entitled woman freaks out when rules apply to her." Twitter threads dissected her posture, her tone, her clothes. Some speculated about her mental health. Others accused her of pulling the race card. It wasn't just strangers fueling the fire. Pundits on morning radio referred to her as that unstable lady with the corporate ego. Local news anchors used words like outburst, disturbance, and incident. One station even labeled the footage the Crestwood confrontation, as if it were a boxing match. Zella, now reduced to a viral caricature, watched it unfold in silence. She stayed off social media. She turned her phone off after 3 calls from reporters in one afternoon. But she couldn't escape it completely. Her neighbor, an older woman who usually waved at her warmly, now avoided eye contact. Her barista offered a polite, uncomfortable smile before whispering to a coworker. Even her yoga instructor seemed distant, cautious, as if the story had planted a question they weren't brave enough to ask, but couldn't stop thinking. Did she really lose control? Was the bank justified? Zella's inbox filled with emails, some supportive, many not. Messages calling her a liar, a fraud, a grifter. People who didn't know her name a week ago now sent threats to her personal website, accusing her of trying to bring down an honest business. Someone found her LinkedIn profile and posted it in a thread with hundreds of comments. One read, "Another fake trying to climb the ladder by crying racism." The worst part wasn't the hatred. It was the uncertainty. For a few terrifying moments, Zella began to wonder if she had misstepped. Had her tone been too sharp? Should she have just walked away quietly? Should she have stayed silent? Her sense of reality began to erode under the weight of so many strangers telling a different version of her truth. She tried to hold on to what she knew, but her voice felt smaller each day. Then came the interviews. Local talk shows ran segments titled "When Customers Snap" and "Respecting Rules versus Playing the Victim." They didn't mention her name, not directly, but the footage played on screens behind their hosts, while panels of retired professionals and self-proclaimed etiquette experts debated her body language. One panelist, a former bank manager, claimed she was clearly escalating. "You can't raise your voice and expect people to feel safe." Another chimed in, "These days, everyone thinks they're above protocol." The most painful twist came when a former coworker, someone she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, gave a quote to a news site claiming Zella had always had a bit of a temper when she didn't get her way. The betrayal cut deep. Zella had once helped that woman prepare for an interview. Now she was just another voice adding to the smear. By the end of the week, Zella no longer left her apartment unless necessary. She ordered groceries online. She stopped answering calls. Even the support she received, messages from advocacy groups, sympathetic strangers, old friends, felt distant, like echoes from another life. No one could erase what had been done. Her name was poisoned. Her career now shadowed by doubt. Her reputation shredded by a media machine that had twisted her pain into entertainment. And the worst part was that the original video, the truth, had now been buried beneath 1,000 versions of the lie. Zella Harrington, once a respected strategist, was now just a difficult woman in the public eye. Her dignity, her professionalism, and her innocence had all been overwritten. The write-up praised Thad for his composure under pressure and his commitment to protecting institutional integrity, a thinly veiled reference to the confrontation that had cost Zella her professional credibility. The irony burned. While she had been cast as a liability, he was rewarded as a gatekeeper. The very man who had dismissed her as sketchy, who had flagged her without cause, had become a model employee. Her stomach turned as she imagined him celebrating, high-fiving his co-workers, standing proudly as Dresden Clay, the cold, sharp-eyed manager who had ripped her check, offered him a congratulatory handshake and an envelope-marked performance bonus. The word vindication floated through the bank's internal communications. Meanwhile, the video of Zella's meltdown, as it was now widely labeled, continued to circulate. People no longer needed her name to recognize her face. She became a symbol in the worst way, a cautionary tale of what not to do when dealing with authority. Her privacy evaporated. Her personal and professional lives collided as curious strangers dug into her past. But the consequences of the smear campaign didn't stop with her. They spread outward like poison. That same week, her roommate Kira, a soft-spoken graphic designer who had lived with her for 2 years, received a call from their property management office. According to the voice on the line, the company had conducted a routine review of tenant records. They claimed they had reason to believe the apartment might be at risk for reputational damage based on recent media controversies. Zella knew immediately what they were referring to. Kira pleaded with the landlord, explained the video wasn't the whole story, that Zella had done nothing illegal. But they didn't care. The eviction notice arrived 2 days later, 30 days to vacate. Zella offered to move out on her own, to let Kira stay, but the lease was joint. They both had to go. Kira tried to hide her disappointment, but the strain was visible. Their friendship, while not broken, was fractured by stress neither of them deserved. On top of that, Zella received a letter from the bank notifying her that the safety deposit box registered in her name had been temporarily frozen pending internal compliance review. She hadn't even remembered the box until the letter arrived. It held a few important documents, a family heirloom, nothing of monetary value. But now even that was out of reach. She called the branch to ask for clarification. The voice on the other end, unfamiliar and robotic, repeated that it was standard procedure during internal audits. No details were offered, no access granted. Zella felt the walls closing in. The life she had built methodically, honestly, through late nights and careful planning, was now being dismantled piece by piece. She couldn't walk into a coffee shop without wondering who had seen the video. Couldn't submit a job application without fearing what a background check might turn up, even if it was just a Google her kind of review. Every corner of her existence was under scrutiny, and yet the men who had orchestrated her fall thrived. Thad smiled in company photos. Dresden attended community banking events as a guest speaker. They spoke about trust, responsibility, security. Words that should have meant something. Words that mocked her now. She wanted to scream, to storm into that bank and demand an audience. But what would she say? Who would listen? Everyone had already chosen their side. Zella's strength had not left her, but had been buried under layers of exhaustion, shame, and an ever-tightening noose of professional and personal ruin. One evening, while boxing up the apartment with Kira, she found a sealed envelope addressed to her in the mailbox. There was no return address, only the words "keep going" scribbled in looping cursive. Inside was a printed article from a small independent media site, detailing how minority customers faced disproportionately higher rates of account flagging and service denial in major banking institutions. Assuming it was a glitch, she logged into her Crestwood account and was met with an alarming red banner across the top of the screen. "Account restricted, please contact customer service." Panic crawled up her spine. She tried again. Same message. She clicked through to view her checking account and saw pending compliance review stamped where her balance should have been. Her savings showed a zero balance. Her credit card was frozen too. The air thinned. She called the bank's customer service line immediately, holding her breath as the robotic menu directed her through layers of indifference. After nearly 20 minutes on hold, a woman with a clipped voice answered, barely giving her name before asking, "Can you verify your last 4 digits of social?" Zella complied. The woman clicked her keyboard. "Yes, Ms. Harrington, your account has been flagged by our fraud monitoring team. I can't give details at this time. I recommend visiting your local branch for further assistance." Zella's chest tightened. "Your branch is the problem," she said, her voice cracking. "Your manager is the problem." "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I can't release additional information over the phone," the woman repeated with detached calm. Zella hung up, her hands trembling. Her rent was due in 3 days. She had groceries to buy. Every financial artery was now blocked. She felt like a ghost in her own life, erased from the system she trusted. The next 24 hours passed in a fog of anxiety. She called her client, the one who had issued the check, and asked them to reissue it to a different bank. She spent hours on the phone with utility providers begging for extensions, unable to explain without sounding like she was making it all up. Even her voice betrayed her now. It wavered, cracked under pressure, the way people associate with guilt. She hated how much she had changed. The once controlled, confident woman she had been just weeks earlier now second-guessed every word, every sentence. She barely left the apartment. Kira had moved in with her boyfriend to avoid further complications. And though they remained on good terms, the silence left in her absence was heavy. The walls felt tighter, more oppressive. Zella scrolled endlessly through her phone, unable to focus, unable to sleep. The worst part was the waiting, the uncertainty. How long would her accounts be frozen? Would they report her to collections over nothing? Would this nightmare ever end? She opened her email and found another blow. Her application for a new client contract had been denied. The message read, "We've decided to go with a different candidate. Best of luck." She knew what it meant. They Googled her. They saw the edited video. They didn't want the trouble. Her name had become a warning sign, a red flag on every system she used to rely on. On the 3rd day of her account freeze, she walked to a local library to access public Wi-Fi and print the article from the envelope again. She needed to hold something in her hands, something that told her she wasn't imagining the injustice. As she waited at the print desk, an older black woman approached. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and carried a stack of books labeled History Curriculum 8th grade. Her name tag read Yvette Chow. She gave Zella a gentle smile. "I saw your face on the news," she said softly. Zella froze, instinctively tensing for what might follow. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. People see what they want to see, and they forget to ask questions." Zella swallowed hard, unable to find the words. Yvette continued, pulling something from her book stack, a folded piece of paper. "I know what it's like to be silenced," she said, "but your truth is coming. I believe you." She handed the note over, gave Zella one more knowing nod, and walked off before Zella could respond. The note, written in clean cursive, read, "Keep standing. The people who hurt you are being watched now too. There are others who see what's happening. You're not alone." Zella folded it carefully and placed it inside her wallet. It wasn't a solution. It didn't unfreeze her accounts or restore her job prospects. But it anchored her, reminded her that not everyone had been fooled, that somewhere someone still believed in her integrity, her voice, her version of the truth. She stayed offline, recentered herself, and spent each day rebuilding in the shadows. It started with small steps, journaling, documenting every instance of her mistreatment with timestamps, names, and dates. She began researching policies, identifying loopholes and violations committed by Crestwood Bank. Her background in strategic consulting had always included compliance auditing as a side project, but now it became personal. She pulled late nights reading bank regulations, case studies, and federal anti-discrimination policies. Every entry she logged, every inconsistency she uncovered, became a piece of armor. Meanwhile, a shift had started at Crestwood. The anonymous video that had initially exposed their behavior didn't vanish as quickly as they'd hoped. A few independent journalists picked it up, digging into prior incidents at the same branch, unearthing quietly settled complaints from other customers of color. Though the mainstream outlets didn't follow up, internal leadership at Crestwood took notice. The legal department advised a soft restructuring strategy, not an admission of guilt, but a way to appear progressive, proactive. A memo leaked within the company mentioned a new executive-level hire, someone with a strong background in ethics and public oversight. The press release described the move as a bold step toward restoring public confidence. The title, Regional Compliance Chief. The announcement was made with buzzwords like integrity, diversity, and realignment. The staff at Crestwood's main branch read the news with casual detachment. Promotions at that level rarely affected them directly. Thad barely skimmed the memo before returning to his station. Dresden pretended to care in a staff meeting, nodding along to phrases like transparency, enhancement, and culture shift, but his eyes revealed the truth. He thought it was just PR fluff. He assumed, like many, that the new executive would be another suit sent from corporate, far removed from the trenches. But that morning, when the elevator opened at 9:15 sharp, every assumption was shattered. Zella Harrington stepped into the marble lobby of Crestwood's flagship branch, wearing a charcoal gray suit and black heels, a leather case tucked beneath her arm. Her posture was poised, her expression calm, her eyes sharp with purpose. She had come back not to plead, not to protest, but to lead. She walked to the front desk and flashed her new ID badge. The receptionist did a double-take, unsure whether she was looking at the same woman who had once been dragged from the branch under suspicion. The badge confirmed it. Zella Harrington, Chief Compliance Officer, Crestwood Regional Division. The inner circle at corporate knew. The board had voted after a confidential interview process. Her resume had spoken for itself. Harvard Law coursework, years of consulting, published audits on industry reform. And then there was her story. They had seen her file, read the reports, watched the uncut video that only a few had access to. The truth had not been broadcast to the world, but behind closed doors, it had spoken volumes. Appointing her was part ethics, part image, but mostly strategy. They needed a fixer, someone with credibility. Zella fit both needs. And now, as she walked through the branch she had once exited in tears, her heels echoed across the tile with quiet vengeance. She didn't make a scene. She didn't announce herself. She moved past Thad, who didn't recognize her at first, too caught up in his computer screen. She passed Dresden's office door and paused, just for a moment, before walking to the executive suite where her name now lived on the doorplate. Inside the conference room, department heads were gathering for an all-staff policy seminar, mandatory attendance. Zella stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and addressed the room. Her voice was calm, but filled with quiet intensity. Good morning. I'm Zella Harrington, your new Chief Compliance Officer. We'll be conducting a thorough audit of this branch and implementing new protocols, ones based not just on policy, but on principle. Thad looked up, pale. Every manager, assistant, and teller was required to attend the midday town hall. An email circulated with the agenda, performance updates, revised protocols, and a formal welcome for the new regional compliance chief. No names were mentioned, no hints dropped, but the whispers had already begun. The new executive was rumored to be tough. Some said she had a federal background. Others speculated she was part of a public relations stunt, another soulless hire meant to appease shareholders. Thad joked to a coworker that she'd probably be someone who never even set foot in the lobby. Dresden, less flippant, still carried himself with arrogance, convinced his spotless internal reviews insulated him. He polished his watch during the meeting's lead-up, barely listening to the initial reports on profit margins and client retention. The room buzzed with idle chatter as the CEO approached the podium, flanked by two senior executives. He adjusted his tie and smiled broadly, projecting warmth and authority. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "I want to thank you for your continued commitment to Crestwood's mission during what has been, admittedly, a challenging quarter. Public trust is not just earned, it's guarded. And that's why we're making bold moves to protect what we stand for." He paused, letting the words settle. "Today, I'm proud to introduce someone who embodies that mission. She brings a rigorous track record of ethical oversight, and she has lived the importance of fairness firsthand. Please welcome Zella Harrington, your new Chief Compliance Officer." The words struck like thunder. For a second, the room didn't move. Zella stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor as she took the CEO's place at the microphone. The murmurs fell into silence. Thad's eyes went wide, his face drained of color as recognition set in. Dresden stiffened visibly, his lips parting just slightly, as though to protest, but nothing came out. Zella didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked out at the audience, her presence calm but commanding. She let the silence stretch, not out of cruelty, but gravity. Then she began. "I stood in this very lobby," she said, voice steady, "not long ago. Not as a guest, not as your leader, but as a client. A client who was dismissed, humiliated, and accused, without verification, without investigation, without justice." She let the words land, watching the discomfort ripple through the crowd. No one interrupted. What happened to me was not just a failure of protocol. It was a failure of culture, of humanity. And I'm not the only one it happened to. She opened her portfolio and placed several files on the table beside her. "In the last 30 days, I've reviewed every flagged incident from this branch over the last 2 years. I've read every complaint, every response, or lack thereof. I've interviewed former clients, listened to internal calls, and audited the records you thought were closed." She turned her gaze directly to Thad. "Mr. Pruitt," she said evenly, "your name appears in 37% of those complaints." His mouth opened slightly, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. Zella shifted her eyes to Dresden. "And Mr. Clay, as branch manager, your signatures authorized 17 of those dismissals, each marked resolved, with no follow-up, no documentation, and in several cases, clear contradictions to bank policy." Dresden swallowed. Zella returned to the room. Bias is not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. Paperwork ignored. Calls not returned. Faces you see, but never really acknowledge. That ends now. She stepped away from the microphone, walked toward the front row, and picked up a folder labeled Remediation Plan. "We're launching a full procedural overhaul," she announced. "Every teller, manager, and officer will undergo mandatory equity and ethics training. We're reopening every complaint flagged for discrimination or profiling. And we're creating an independent task force, one that reports directly to me, to monitor compliance going forward." She walked slowly back to the podium and looked directly at the staff. "I didn't come back for revenge," she said. "I came back because no one else should ever experience what I did. Not on my watch. Not in this building. Not in this company." The room stayed frozen in silence. HR issued a directive that all discrimination complaints from the past 2 years would be reopened and reviewed by a neutral external firm. A separate legal team was contracted to oversee the investigation. Dresden Clay received his notice the next morning. He was removed from his position as branch manager and reassigned to a temporary role in back-office operations. No direct reports, no client access. The internal memo cited ongoing compliance investigation and procedural audit. His face, once cold with confidence, now wore the expression of a man unmoored. He avoided the main lobby, entering through side doors, his shoulders hunched, his nameplate removed from the office he once ruled like a monarch. Thad fared no better. He arrived that morning to find a sealed envelope waiting at his desk. Inside, a formal suspension letter, effective immediately. He was to turn in his keys and badge and report for an investigatory hearing scheduled for the following week. He stood frozen for nearly 10 minutes, gripping the paper, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. When he finally looked up and saw Zella walk by, composed, precise, holding her binder of reports, he couldn't meet her eyes. She didn't slow down, didn't gloat, just moved forward with purpose, as she had every day since her return. Staff who once joked about her behind closed doors now avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. But not out of fear, out of respect. The environment shifted palpably. Tellers straightened up. Managers reviewed protocol manuals. Employees whispered about changes coming to the entire regional structure. In quiet corners of the branch, some even expressed cautious hope. "She knows what it's like," one new teller said. "She actually gets it." Meanwhile, Zella reviewed every piece of documentation related to past dismissals, including her own. She flagged inconsistencies, documented false entries, and noted patterns of implicit bias in how complaints were processed. The data didn't just expose individual misconduct, it revealed systemic negligence. Her audits would inform not just new training programs, but hiring, promotion, and accountability metrics across the region. But it wasn't all administrative. Some changes were deeply symbolic. That same week, Zella instructed facilities to remove the old transaction counter and replace it with a more open, accessible client services layout, one designed to eliminate psychological barriers between tellers and clients. The counter where her check had once been torn was demolished. A contractor hauled the broken wood away on a Thursday afternoon while staff watched silently. That evening, long after most employees had left, Zella returned to the lobby alone. She wore no blazer, no badge, just a dark sweater and slacks. She stood exactly where she had once stood as a client. Alone, powerless, misjudged. The air was still. The lights dimmed for closing. She looked around slowly, as if reclaiming each square foot from the memory of that humiliation. Her heart pounded, not with anger, but clarity. She knelt and touched the floor, fingertips grazing the cool tile. It was the same ground where her dignity had been shattered. But now, no one could take that from her again. Not here. Not ever. Behind her, a janitor entered, saw her, and paused. He didn't speak, just gave a quiet nod of acknowledgement before moving along. Zella remained for a few minutes more, then stood, exhaled deeply, and walked out into the cool evening air. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the private revolution unfolding inside that branch. But Zella knew, and the people who worked there knew. Dresden's investigation continued, his record scrutinized for buried infractions. It began with a knock on Zella's office door late one Wednesday morning. She looked up from a policy draft and saw a familiar but changed figure standing in the frame. Thad Pruitt, no longer in his polished teller uniform, but in a plain collared shirt and slacks, looking as if he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were ringed with fatigue, his posture uncertain. For a moment, Zella said nothing. She wanted to preserve her space, her boundary. But something in his expression halted her judgment. He wasn't there to reclaim pride or argue policy. He looked disarmed. "Can I speak to you?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes." She nodded slowly and gestured to the empty chair across from her. He sat down, hands clasped together like he was holding something fragile inside them. "I was angry when this all started," he said. I thought I was being targeted. I told myself I was just doing my job, following protocol, protecting the bank. That's what I told myself every day." Zella didn't interrupt. She listened, arms folded, not cold, but measured. He continued. "But the last few weeks, watching everything unravel, going through the hearing, reading those client complaints, I saw the patterns, the reports you wrote, the footage. And then I saw myself." His voice cracked. "I didn't see people. I saw problems. I saw a black woman with a large check and assumed the worst because it was easy. It was reflex. I didn't question it because I'd never been forced to. And when you came back, when I saw you at that podium, it scared the hell out of me, not because I feared punishment, but because I finally saw what I'd become." His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm sorry. I know it's late. And I know it doesn't fix what I did to you. But I want to say it anyway. You didn't deserve it. None of them did." Zella let the silence stretch for a beat, then leaned forward. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not when it mattered?" Thad took a deep breath. "Because I didn't think it would cost me anything. And now that it has, I see how cheap I made other people's lives look. I was scared of losing a job, but you lost your name. I saw the clip. The full one. I know what I did. I can't unmake it. But I want to start making something better, if you'll let me. Zella nodded once. Not an absolution, but an acknowledgement. Words matter, she said. But change matters more. If you're serious, there are equity mentorship sessions starting next week. I expect you there. Not as a project, she looked at him directly, but as a participant. Thad stood slowly. I'll be there. Every one of them. Then he left quietly, without asking for anything more. Later that afternoon, an envelope appeared on her desk. No markings, just her name in elegant cursive. Inside was a handwritten letter from Dresden Clay. The tone was starkly different from the clipped emails and deflective memos she had known him for. It read, Ms. Harrington, you have every right to ignore this. I wouldn't blame you if you did. But I needed to say something beyond the paperwork and the shame. When I watched you speak that day, I didn't see a woman trying to humiliate us. I saw a woman standing taller than I'd ever had the courage to. I've spent years mistaking control for leadership, silence for peace, protocol for justice. You showed me what those words actually mean. Not by yelling, not by retaliating, but by refusing to be erased. I've submitted my resignation, not because I was forced, but because I should have left long ago. I didn't belong in a role that required sight I refused to develop. You changed me, not with fury, but with truth. I hope, in time, that truth changes more than just me. Sincerely, Dresden. Zella folded the letter and placed it in the same folder where she kept her first torn check, the one they destroyed in front of her that day when the world turned its back. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. But something inside her settled. Not closure, not entirely, but motion, forward. That evening, she stepped out of the office and paused at the front counter. It was newly remodeled, open layout, neutral tones, no glass barriers. A young intern greeted her with a smile. Behind her, new faces mingled with old ones, working more quietly now, more deliberately. The culture was shifting, slowly, painfully, but visibly. Outside the building, a young black couple entered the lobby with their child. The teller met them with a genuine smile. There was no bell slammed, no raised eyebrows, no security summoned, just service, just respect. Zella watched for a moment, then turned and walked toward the exit, the late sun casting golden slants across the floor. She had walked into this bank once expecting fairness and received humiliation. Now, she walked out not as a client, but as the woman who changed it. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve. Her steps were quiet, her head high. She didn't need the world to know her name. The people in that building knew. The ones she'd lifted, the ones she'd held accountable, the ones who had finally begun to see. She had turned injustice into instruction, and that would echo far beyond marble floors and teller counters. It would echo in every policy, every training, every voice that finally said, "This is right," and meant it. The end. If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge injustice and spotlight resilience. I'd love to hear what you think. What was your favorite twist in the plot? Did any moment stand out or hit home for you? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, too. Your feedback shapes what stories come next. Let's talk.